It's Wednesday, October 14th, 2015, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Addi Regev, Director of Product at Aberdeen. She's going to lead a talk on web design in a multi-platform era, I know a topic that many of you are very interested in. Let me just, for those of you maybe joining us for the first time, let me just explain the format briefly. And the format is the people you're seeing at the bottom of your screen are mentors and mentees from the Product Mentor program. A person who will be talking tonight is one of our really great mentors in the program. And basically, the Product Mentorship program is a thing that pairs up people, mentors and mentees, for a period of 6 months to help really make better product managers and better products. So we're going to just quickly kind of go around and do some introductions on the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to start with Ladislav.
Hi everyone, I'm Ladislav. I'm a product manager based in London, and I'm also a group mentor in the Product Mentors session, program.
And Andrew.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Fields. I'm a product person at Verizon. I work on their mobile apps, and I'm currently a mentee.
And Addi.
Hi everybody, I'm Addi. I'm a product manager, a director of product at Outbrain, and a mentor in the product mentor group.
Excellent. And so what you see, the people you see in the room are mentors and mentees from the program. Definitely not everyone who's participating, just a few who could join us tonight. But the rest, because it's such a hard program to get into, we believe very much in paying it forward, and really trying to find ways to give more people access to the program. And so this is live streamed. And so if you want to ask questions also of today's mentor, just go to theproductmentor.com/live. And there you'll be able to watch the live stream and also ask questions at the same time. As the questions come in, I'll pass them along as I moderate them tonight. And just about myself, I'm Jeremy Horn. I'm also known as the Product Guy. And like I said, I'll pass along the stuff. Just post your questions to theproductmentor.com/live. And with all that said, let me hand it over to our mentor tonight, Addi.
Hi everybody, let me start my presentation here. Okay, so tonight's topic is web design in the multi-screen era. It's basically how do you choose which method to use when you develop for mobile. So let's jump right in. So everybody knows that mobile devices cannot be ignored anymore. It's basically a familiar story that visitors are trying to get to your sites or your email or your product through mobile. And if they don't get a really good experience on mobile, they get very frustrated. And as a product manager, you'll probably hear about it. It's kind of hard to control it because people are using their mobile more and more in more times of day. And if they happen to get an email or a message or need to do something or interact with your product, there's a good chance they'll do it from their mobile phone just because it's in their hands. So it's basically important to not miss on the opportunity of mobile. And the question is, how do you choose between the options that you have to develop for mobile? If it's native with applications, if it's responsive, or if it's adaptive for the web experience, or if it's only just a mobile website, as we used to see a lot of those in the past. So we'll start with a little bit of data. Because I think this is the best way to start looking and trying to find a solution to a problem. And this data is taken, the next few slides are taken from ComScore. They released their 2015 mobile information a couple of weeks ago, or a month ago. And this is it. So this is pretty recent. So basically, as time goes by, most of the digital media time is spent more and more on mobile. And if you look at the graph, you'll see that more and more of this mobile time is actually apps. So this is the 54% is the apps, and 62 is the mobile. And although it looks like desktop is down here, it's actually down comparative to mobile. It's actually growing as well, but it's just not growing at the same rate. So it's not dead yet. So the next slide is about the fact that it's not really easy to acquire and retain the loyal app audience. So from Comscore data, if you look at it, it's pretty staggering to see that your one application, this is for individuals, okay? It's share of time spent on an app, and this is the first app, and then the second app, and the third app. And you can see that the first app, people are spending more than 50%, 50 on smartphone, and more than that even on tablet, on a single app. And then it trails off very quickly, with the second with only 20, the third with only 10, and then the long tail gets you all the way to 25. But that's it. Most of our time is spent on a max of 25 apps a month, with one of them taking the majority of the time. If you look at data from the top individual apps, you see that basically Facebook and Google kind of conquered the chart. Facebook has 2 of the top US apps with Facebook and Facebook Messenger, and Google has basically the 4 others out of the 6 with YouTube, Google Search, Google Play, and Google Maps. Apple comes only after. So it's pretty hard to get yourself in there. What's interesting to note is the concentration, basically the concentration of people that are using mobile web versus the time they're spending on it. So this is number of unique visitors.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here quickly. Will had a question. Who posted a question, and I'll read it off. It's a very quick question. That's why I was just jumping in.
Sure.
Will was asking, what's the single first app? He says the browser?
No, Facebook.
Facebook.
Yeah.
All right. There's your answer, Will. And everyone else, keep them coming in, and post the productmentor.com/live, and I'll keep jumping in with your questions. Back to you.
Sure. So let's get back to the slide. So basically, the audience in mobile web is basically a mile wide and an inch deep. Why? Because it is a very wide audience that's not very highly engaged. So in this chart, you can see the average monthly audience with unique visitors, and you can see the difference between mobile web and mobile apps. And apps are very low compared to mobile web. And it's also the growth rate is double for mobile web. In the next slide, you basically can see that mobile web usage is growing faster and for larger audiences. And this basically is from Morgan Stanley rendering the Comscore data, just so you guys know. But basically, you can see that the US mobile web audiences are 2 times larger than the app users, and it's growing also at 1.2x faster than apps. So it's definitely not something to put aside and forget about. Okay, it's something you need to think about, and it's not necessarily the most important thing in the world, and we'll talk about it in a second, to develop an app. So next, after you looked at kind of the market data and the general trends, you need to look at your company's needs, goals, budget for, to develop on mobile. So when you look at it, the first thing you need to look at is the go-to-market strategy. How do you guys acquire your customers, getting them to be, getting the awareness up about your product. How much are you using web in general? Is your product a digital product, or it's a physical product that has a website, or if the company has a website? How do you guys acquire, get the prospects and acquire the customers? Are you paying for search engine optimization? Are you paying for pay-per-click advertising? Are you doing social? It's important to understand what are your touch points with your customers as kind of a first thing. The next thing you want to look at is your goals. Okay, so you probably have goals for acquisition and for retaining customers, and it's important to understand what are these goals and how can you support them with mobile. Is mobile just another channel in the mix? Is mobile a goal by itself? Is mobile an enabler for something else, something bigger? Is it part of a bigger story? It's important to understand that and the goals to kind of better pinpoint what is it that you can do with mobile. The next thing is where are your customers? So it's one thing to think of how do I want to interact with my customers on different channels. The other is where are my customers? I need to be where they are. Okay, so if they are more on mobile or more on tablet or more on desktops or more on the phone, you need to develop your product and your touch points with your customers where your customers are and they are comfortable interacting with you. The next one is that, is it a digital product? So if it's a digital product, you probably have many more touch points with the prospects and the users than you would have if it's not a digital product. But in any case, if you have any digital property, this digital property might need a mobile, at least a mobile extension, if not a mobile presence on its own. Last one, budget, and I think that's the most important one. You need to figure out what is basically the parameters of what your company is allocating for mobile. And it's important because it's not only that you need to design and develop whatever experience you are developing on mobile, it's also that you need a team of designers and developers and QA engineers to maintain this product going forward. So it's not just a set and forget kind of thing. It's a product on its own. And a product needs a roadmap and a maintenance strategy, and it's a long-term commitment. So it's very important to know your budget and know your commitment, your company's commitment in advance before you make decisions on whether to go one way or another.
I'm going to jump in right there. Got a question from Andrew. So Andrew, I'm going to hand it over to you for your question.
Thanks. So I'm wondering, I was kind of surprised by those numbers in the sense of mobile website to app usage. And there's often a push to, if you have an app, there's this giant, like either a slide down or a giant thing that shows up once you get to the website that pushes people to the app. Do you think that customers, it's kind of trying to get customers to use the app for whatever reason that we think that's a better experience for them or whatever it ends up being? Do you think that's a good strategy in the sense of should we instead improve on the mobile website and also just kind of mention the app, or should we try to push customers towards the app, at the expense of the mobile website?
Great question. So generally speaking, once you've built an app, you probably do want your customers to interact with it. Otherwise, it was a really total waste. So this is why everybody is promoting their apps very heavily once they developed ones. It's also in this time, app discoverability is so hard, right? You go into the app stores and it's so hard to find something if you don't know exactly the name of it. So it helps if you promote your app in your other touch points with your customers, because then they know what you're talking about. They're in context, and it's much easier to acquire acquire them this way. So once you have an app, definitely push them to go download it and use it. The problem is that 90% of the apps that users are downloading will probably be used once and never again. Once.
Yeah.
So you need to be very, very clear on what your goals when you develop an app to make sure that you develop an app for the right purpose and you can actually achieve this purpose. Let me get back to presentation.
That's great. So just for everyone else, just keep the questions coming in at theproductmentor.com/talk. That's all the questions we have at the moment. Back to you, Addi.
Okay, so we looked at the market data and we tried to look at our company's strategy and goals and budget, and now we need to look at data. Again, I think that's the most important way to make decisions, and it's basically what we're looking at is behavioral patterns. So you need to look at your customer journey, okay? From your first touch point with the customer, okay, so how do they become aware of your product, of your company? Through the funnel of how do they become a prospect, and how do they become a customer, okay, a visitor and then a customer. And once they become a customer, how do they interact with your product? Where are these touch points? And most likely in today's environment, they probably have multiple touch points on multiple channels with different parts of your organization or your product, or even between your website, the emails that you're sending to your customers, and the SMS if you're using SMS or text messages, or push notifications if you have an app. You already have kind of an array of touch points with your customers, and they might or might not interact with these different touch points on mobile or not. So it's important to kind of go through your whole customer journey and identify these touch points and identify what are these touch points and what your users are using in these. So we use web analytics a lot, and it's basically through the web analytics I'm looking for patterns of platform. So is it iOS or Android? I'm looking for operation system. I'm looking for device types. And when I think about device types, I think about things like not only if it's this kind of device or that kind of device. I'm looking also on is it a feature-rich device versus a simpler device? Is it a device with Retina display? Is it a cheap device versus an expensive device? Because I want to kind of identify my customers in the most granular way I can. So then I can figure out what is the exact set of experiences that I need to develop and for which exact basically devices and specs. And I think the most important thing is the multi-screen behavior. So people today are using their mobile early in the morning, and then while they're commuting, and then they get to the office and they probably sit in front of their desktop office screen for most of the day. Maybe at lunch they go back to their mobile. At night when they come back at home, they'll probably sit in front of the TV with their tablet in their hands. And then before they go to sleep, they'll have the mobile again because that's the one that we have usually just next to us in bed. So throughout this variation of devices throughout the day, your customers might interact with you on different devices for different things or just in different times. So it's important to kind of understand the multi-screen behavior across your customer journey and throughout the day. The next set of things we're looking at is basically even going a layer deeper. It's basically which activities are they doing on which device Okay, if we're talking about the fact that they're moving around between mobile and tablet and desktop, they might have, if they're fanboys of Apple, they probably have everything Apple, right? And then it's just one OS. But it might be that they have, the desktop at work is Microsoft, and then at home they have a tablet that's Android, but their phone is iPhone, or vice versa. And they do specific activities if they definitely if they develop habits. But even if they don't develop habits, they probably use different devices for different activities. So for instance, at American Express, which is a company I used to work for, our customers would check their balance and pay their bill on the mobile app, but they would kind of review their monthly bill and make any inquiries or disputes on desktop. And it was very consistent. So when we were thinking about whether to develop a feature for disputes on the app, we decided not to do that because they basically never try even to do that from the app, and there's a way to get there. So if they're always doing it very consistently on desktop, you're like, okay, I'll leave it on desktop, and that's fine. So it's very important to kind of look very deeply. The other thing is trying to find commonalities, right? So what are these main devices that your customers are using? What are the common screen sizes? Again, at American Express, we found that 90% of our traffic came from iOS devices. So when it was a question of, do we develop for iOS or Android or Microsoft, it was clear that we're starting with iOS. There was no question about it. Another thing is, when are they interacting with the different devices and the different activities, and how often are they doing it? If it's a one-time thing, you might not want to develop an app for that. If it's a kind of repetitive thing, you'll have better chances at creating something that will add value. And basically, kind of looking at all the touch points and finding the most activity, where people are most engaged with you, as basically an opportunity, a point of opportunity to develop a more robust mobile experience. So after you collected the data and you look at the market, you looked at your goals and your objectives, you looked at your budget, and you looked at your data to understand user behavior patterns, the devices, the activities, etc. Now you need to choose. And the first choice is between native and web. So let's start with apps. And you probably know that, but we'll review it anyway. Apps are really great for repetitive tasks, for tasks you're doing on a regular basis. The more, the better. Okay, if it's something you do a few times a day, it's great. If it's something you do once a week, fine. If it's something you do once a month, you can do it. If it's something you do every 6 months, nobody's going to keep an app for something they need every 6 months. It's not going to make it in the cut of the 25 apps you're actually using every month. So think about it when you develop an app for that. It's good for the loyal customers. It's good for the customers you already acquired, because they need to actually know your application exists and want to interact with it on a regular basis. So it's less good for the casual users, casual customers, or the prospects that either don't know that you exist, and discoverability is going to be very hard, or they know that you exist but they don't know what value you can bring to them, or they understand the value but they're not going to use it on a regular basis. And all of these are going to basically lower the chances of people actually using it. It's basically built to increase interaction between you and your loyal customers, and it's basically using I think it's best when it's using the unique mobile capabilities, because then it's basically built for what it's using. Unique mobile capabilities can be things like the camera, the location services, It can be the messaging, the push notifications, or SMS. It can be all the different gyro, accelerometer, or sensors that the phones today have. These things are very unique to the mobile, and when you use them, it's kind of hard to replace them with something else because you don't have it on desktop and you have much less on tablet. So think about it when you develop it. On the other hand, mobile web. Mobile web is great for discovery, right? Because if you're searching for something, Google search is is going to provide a much easier way for discovery than the app stores. The casual users that is using your experience or your site once in a while, it's great for them. It's great for multiple devices, right? So if you need to maintain feature parity across different devices, from smartphones to tablets and through desktops, it's great to build once and support all of them versus building specific apps. And think about it, apps are specific to the OS, right? So you need to build one app for iOS, one app for Android, one app for Microsoft, maybe one app for for Amazon, for Kindle. So if you start developing this plethora of apps, when you still need to do web as well. So if you need multiple devices support, it's probably a great option for you. And the last thing is infrequent activity. So things like disputes that I talked about before, or again, American Express, boring me, card activation. Okay, so card activation is something you do once in a while when you get a new card. Usually, maybe once every 2 years if you have more than one card, a little bit more. But for a once-a-year experience, to build an app experience is a luxury. And it's a luxury that can be built if you have other things in the app, but I wouldn't build an app just for activation. So this is kind of the differences between, the big differences between building for apps and building for mobile web. So let's say that you decided you're going web, okay? And now you need to choose which method to use. Users couldn't care less what method you choose. All they want is for you to have an experience they can effectively navigate and interact with, no matter what device they're using. So for them, it needs to be completely seamless and smooth, okay? It doesn't matter if it's a native, or if it's responsive, or if it's adaptive, or if it's a mobile web experience. As long as they can get to it, they can navigate to what they need, they can interact with it, and they can do everything they wanted to do, all the interactions they wanted to achieve on their device, wherever they are. So let's talk about the differences between responsive and adaptive a little bit. So responsive web design is basically a single layout that's basically always changing. And if you look at the hoops here, it's something like this. Okay, so it's one thing that changes when the environment changes, basically. So it's basically fluidly changing and responding to fit the screen. And it's the best viewing experience you can have for a website, no matter which device. And it's great for new devices. So when new devices come out to the market, there's some catch-up that companies usually have to do to kind of incorporate the new screen sizes or resolutions, and responsive just takes care of it naturally. It's using fluid grids and fluid elements in a way that the elements themselves and the grids are calculated as a relative aspect ratio, basically, to the other elements and the grid itself, in a way that when the screen size is getting smaller, it's basically just keeping the same ratio, just getting smaller or bigger based on the device. And no matter how much you resize your screen, it's basically always the same layout. It responds automatically, and it's basically like a single ball that's growing or shrinking to fit through the different sizes of the hoops. So the other side of the fence is adaptive. And adaptive web design is basically a set of layouts that are built specifically to fit a few screen sizes. It basically will choose, it will change to fit the predetermined set of screens and devices. It uses, you build static layouts. So you build a layout for a few different device sizes from small to large, usually about 6, and with specific breakpoints. So, you know, tablet is about 1024. When it goes below it, it goes to mobile. When it goes over it, it goes to desktop. And you might have a few breakpoints in the middle for the 6-inch phablets, 5-inch, and the 4-inch, and maybe once upon a time for 3-inch. I think they don't do that anymore. The specific layouts are made in advance, each separately, and specifically for the device dimensions. And instead of basically a single experience that zooms in and out, you have basically different sizes of balls that you use the right one depending on the hoop that's presented to you. So how do you choose between them? Responsive or adaptive? Let's look at responsive first. So with responsive, the basic code for responsive requires much more code. And it requires much more code because you basically, each of the elements need to be able to contract or the other word, to basically grow or go smaller. And it's all calculated on the fly. It requires much more code. It's more complex and it takes more time, therefore. It's basically one code base that fits all, and you need to think about all the different use cases when you write it. So it's a complex code and it's a complex process to think through. Therefore, it's harder to design and it's harder to build. The good thing is that it guarantees to work very well on all devices, as I said before, including new devices. So this is crucial in, you know, the environment that we have today, that every couple of months there are new devices in the market. If you want to make sure that all of your users can experience your website in the best way, responsive is going to guarantee that. It also loads faster because there's only one layout, so you don't need to load many layers or many options. You load once and then just change according to the screen. It does require a bigger investment up front, so it's good for the more established companies, maybe, or a company that really is looking to the future. And it's basically, you know, if you decide that this is the way to go, and you have the proper talent in place to actually think through the design and to build it, you're guaranteed a great experience that will give you a great experience, or your customers a great experience for a long time to come. Let's think responsive. So responsive, the code is much more streamlined. It's built to fit the different screen from an interaction perspective, from, you know, layout perspective. If you think about the difference between, I don't know if you guys ever heard that, but developing for iOS at least up until not long ago, I think it's still the case, is much easier than developing to Android. Because like responsive and adaptive, iOS has a set number of different sizes of the screens and resolutions, whereas Android is all over the place. And when you build for that, you need to kind of build for the gamut. So it's very much like responsive and adaptive. In adaptive, you basically build about 6 on regular, the common number is 6. You basically build 6 HTML codes and 6 CSS combinations that will work with these HTML codes for your different screen sizes. And you kind of need to design each layout separately because each device, of course, requires a little bit of different interactions and a different layout that you need to think through. It's less flexible, right? So you have kind of a set size to these HTML CSS combinations. So if the size of the screen vary, it kind of starts breaking apart a little. You might see jumps if you kind of change the size of the screen, and you'll see it later. Or it might stretch a little bit because it's not completely right, but it's the best choice for that device. It is slower to load, as I said before. With responsive, you have just one layout, so it's faster to load. You have 6 layouts. You need to wait a little bit longer. It is cheaper and faster to make because the code is less expensive, because the code is less complex, and because it's kind of a set specs. It's much easier to develop for that, and it's really great for retrofitting existing sites. So basically, if you already have a site and it's working and it's probably a desktop site, adding a couple more or 4 more, 5 more different layouts to cover the spectrum between desktop and mobile all the way through tablet is basically much easier than recoding your whole site as a responsive site to cover for all of them from scratch.
So we have a question from Andrew. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrew for his question.
So I was wondering, for the whole idea of like mobile first for responsive design, where the idea is that you go to the lowest common denominator and the smallest screen and build up from there. I find it somewhat challenging because a lot of times you can lose, although you can say like show on this certain devices or this screen, not show on others, but at some point, you would lose kind of the tools and the space on a larger screen to make sure that it fits on every screen. So I'm wondering, do you think that's a good method to start with the mobile device first? Is there any other suggestion for keeping a good mobile experience, but also making the desktop experience as good as before, or even better if possible?
So generally speaking, I think that mobile first is great when you don't have legacy, right? This is why it's first, right? So you start from scratch, and you start from the most challenging size that requires a lot of thinking around what's the essence of your experience, or what's the most important thing, right? And how do you represent these things, and how do you interact with the different interactions like search and tabs and stuff like that. So so mobile is kind of making you think really hard because you really have very little real estate. So after you've thought about that, you kind of distill the essence of your experience, and growing from that and allowing for a little bit more bells and whistles as you grow the screens is basically easier than taking a full screen or a full website, right? If you think about the websites of large companies, there are hundreds of pages, right? Hundreds of pages that were built in different eras, probably, right? They look differently. They have all sorts of different interactions on them. And to take that experience and now bringing to mobile, you basically need to break it all apart and start afresh. And if you are starting afresh, start with distilling your idea and the essence of it with mobile and just grow it. If you don't want to do that, you basically go adaptive, right? You keep what you have in desktop, and you just distill it or change it, or change the layout, or start, pushing things lower in the priority on the screen to fit the sizes of the devices down. But basically, I think designing for mobile is much more challenging to begin with, and starting with mobile first when you start afresh is a great way to start.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's hard, especially if you have a huge website already and everyone wants certain features and things, and building it from there. So I think the adaptive method would probably be better in that circumstance.
Yeah, definitely. You also need a lot of patience if you are taking a full website of hundreds of pages and you try to cram it into responsive. You basically need to kind of redefine and redesign the whole website, and it just takes longer. So it depends also on your company's patience.
And so our next question comes from Rosh. And Rosh is asking, any good examples of well-known adaptive site versus a responsive site?
Rosh, it's the perfect question. Jeremy, did you say something? I think I missed it.
No, that was just me smiling.
Okay, it is the perfect question and a perfect segue. I'm actually going to show you a couple of examples.
Great.
So let me share my screen again. And I'll go to Aberdeen. So Aberdeen is a site that's built responsively, and you'll see in a second how it looks. So I'm starting with a full kind of desktop screen, and I'm going to start changing, and you'll see what happens. Pay attention to the top nav, and also pay attention to the image in the middle. Basically, very fluidly going between the different screen sizes. And if I go to mobile, that's probably a mobile. So that's Aberdeen. Now let me show you Screaming Frog. So Screaming Frog is adaptive, and what you need to look at here is the nav, again, this hero messaging, and also the columns of the information below. And unfortunately, my screen is pretty small, so you can't see it below my fold, but pay attention. So it's basically keeping pretty still until it gets to a breaking point, and then all of a sudden it changes. So this jump is basically the jump between the different variations or the layouts. Still on 3, and you can see that right now the hero here is basically getting truncated because it doesn't fit perfectly anymore. And if I continue going down, now I switched to a 2-column view and probably a more tablet view. And if I go down even more, now I'm on a mobile. Now if you look at navigation, this is the mobile navigation. It's pretty crude. If you go to the bigger options for tablet, suddenly, I'm back in the navigation is very, very different. You have more options, and the drop downs look very different. And these are the same drop downs that they used for the larger screen. I can share with you later if you want a link with many, many examples for the different, both responsive and adaptive. So this was I'll share this again so you guys can see.
Actually, I want to just jump to a question before you jump back into the slides
Yep.
from an anonymous individual, and I encourage everyone to at least give us your full name or your first name. And this person was asking, if you have an app, how important is the website? I believe that's the question.
So, wow, I hate answering with it depends, but it really depends. So, as I said when we talked about the apps versus mobile web, discoverability is pretty hard on apps. So, if you need your customers to be able to learn about your company and go to your website and learn about your products or offerings, and interact with you as a prospect until you become a customer. These things are very hard to do. From my perspective, I think it's almost impossible to do in an app. Think about the intent that the customer needs to show to download an app, right? They need to know what they're looking for. They need to go and search in the App Store, and the App Store search is not Google, right? You're then lucky your customer is if they found your app. They will download it, maybe use it once, maybe not at all, and then what, right? So I wouldn't necessarily not design or develop a website for discoverability and for awareness and for the prospects. And if you think the app is a good interaction model for your customers, for their journey with you, then by all means develop an app. But I would not skip a website altogether.
Got it. And so keep the questions coming in, theproductmentor.com/live. I'll keep passing them along. Back to you, Addi.
So share my screen again and go back to the presentation. I'll show you just briefly Aberdeen again. So you can see how Aberdeen, their website overall was quite the same. Only the changing of the screen sizes kind of changed the zoom on the imagery, right? And at one point they changed the navigation or the menu. They moved from like a full menu up top to the hamburger, as it's called, with basically the same list of options. Basically because the hamburger takes less space at the top of the screen and is built to work really, really well on mobile, of course, but everything in between. And if we look at Screaming Frog, so basically if you remember, it kind of jumped between this view and this view, right, moving from a 3-column view to a 2-column view, and also kind of getting rid of the hero that got broken between the full screen and the mid-screen here, keeping the same navigation more or less until you get to mobile, and all of a sudden it's completely different navigation, 1 column, and I didn't show you, but basically all the information that you see on the other screens is on mobile. It's just different prioritization of the different content pieces and a very, very long scroll. So one thing that's very, very important to remember, and I think there are I have a lot of scratches on my back to show for it. Responsive design is a great experience to the users if you do it really, really well. But it's not straightforward, and you really need to think through how do you design it. So it's basically, it really shines if you do it well, and it's a great investment for the future. But if you're doing it poorly, it breaks very, very quickly. What's important to think through is basically, even if you want to kind of keep the same experience or the functionality parity between the different devices across the different screen sizes, you want to think how the interaction patterns of desktop versus tablet versus mobile differ, and how do you basically work with the devices and with their capabilities to support these. So a couple of examples. Navigation patterns. So we saw navigation patterns, how they differ between the bigger screens and the smaller screens on both Aberdeen and Screaming Frog. You kind of need to think of, and the move to this hamburger, right? That's very ubiquitous these days. It's just how do you navigate on a smaller screen, and how much of the screen is going to be taken of the very small, real estate that you have. How much is going to be taken for navigation? Another thing is the fold. So I don't know if you noticed that I mentioned that my fold was very high on the screen because I have a very small screen on my laptop. The fold kind of moves around when you have different device sizes. So all of a sudden, the idea of making sure the call to action is above the fold doesn't really hold water anymore. So kind of need to think about it and think about, where are these call to action? Where do you put them? How do you change? Where do they go when the screen sizes change? And it's funny to note that I'm going to look at my notes for a second, so I won't mislead you. So it's very interesting to note that most viewed area is actually just above the fold. Okay, so not at the top. Users will go to a website and will not have enough patience to wait for the websites to load completely. They will just start scrolling. So the area that's viewed the most is actually just above the fold up to lower than the fold, and is actually viewed 3x more times than the top. And it's pretty amazing to think about it. So this idea of I have to cram my stuff above this fold doesn't hold water anymore. So tables and grids, right? So you design a website that has, think about Google AdWords, right? Or Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, all the data that you get, right? The analytics that you get, Google Analytics. You have this big tables full of data, right? That you kind of need. And if you try to cram these tables and grids into the smaller screen sizes, you kind of lose context, and you kind of need to rethink, how do you design a table that still keeps the context but showing only a little bit of information every time? Or, in some cases, you just decide to not show tables and grids in the smaller screens. So it's a matter of, what is the functionality of the tables and the grids, and how do you adapt them to go to the smaller screens? Graphs and charts are kind of the same. The next one is progress steps, right? So a lot of times you'll have, especially in kind of a funnel experience or wizards, you'll have progress steps. And when you have a lot of real estate, it's pretty easy to do. When you have less real estate, suddenly it becomes a little bit more challenging to kind of keep the context of the progress steps and show the progress step and still have enough room in the small device to actually do some interaction or have fields, right? And another one which is pretty big is Lightboxes. So on website, a lot of times you'll have these pop-ups, right, that are coming up after an error or a confirmation or something like that. These things tend to kind of get lost when you're on a smaller device. They stay stationary on a certain location on the site, on the page, and when you're on a smaller screen, a lot of times they will just be hidden somewhere. So you need to be very careful when you have if you have Lightboxes on the bigger screens, to find better solutions. on the smaller ones. Custom elements. We all have custom elements that we develop specifically for our products on the web. These elements need to then fit smaller screens and need to be redesigned, right, for themselves to be responsive as well. Visual design. So if you have big visual designs that are very complex and are kind of meaningful, right, the backgrounds or something like that, when you start squishing the page, you saw with the big hero and the messaging how it got truncated. The same will go with the visual designs, and this might not work very well or support your customers and your customer experience very well if you keep them the same. And last one is web forms and mid-core interactions, which is basically, it's very easy to work on a desktop and fill out a long form, right? You use the keyboard, you skip between the different fields using tab, and it's not very complex to fill a form. When you do it on mobile, all of a sudden it becomes a much greater hassle, right? It becomes longer. It's harder. You cannot skip fields. You kind of need to tap in the field and then tap the information, and you have the keyboard coming up and the keyboard coming down to see the next field, and it becomes this very long process. And good experiences, good websites on mobile invest a lot of time in thinking about the micro interactions. How do you actually move from one field to another, from the from date to the to date in a time frame, right? In a way that's seamless, fluid, automatic, in a way that the customer doesn't have to feel like he's actually working in filling out the form, but it's actually kind of fills itself up. So these are some kind of ideas of the things that you need to think of when you develop for mobile.
So we had some questions that came in. Rosh has a quick one for you. Do you like or hate Lightboxes?
Do I like or hate Lightboxes? So I actually think they're very, very good on bigger screens to grab your customer attention. Okay, so they kind of focus all the attention to this one box with this one message. It's great for, are you sure you want to leave? You didn't save your information kind of thing. Are you sure you're going to, spend $100 on this? Usually it costs $1. These kind of things, I think it's very, very good to use Lightboxes. I think in other cases, especially in the small screens, I prefer to have a more contextually closer, contextually relevant and closer kind of error messaging or confirmation messaging that will be close to where your focus is and the interaction is, versus something that's kind of all-encompassing the page.
Great. Next question comes from Elizabeth Herrera, and she's asking, what are the top 2 devices used for functionality and discoverability? Is it safe to say that desktop and tablet for acquisition when road mapping?
So I would say desktop definitely. There is more and more use of Google search also on mobile. So mobile is not necessarily a bad tool for discoverability. And we actually see more and more investment from Google on mobile ads because people are using search on mobile more and more. And I don't know if you guys know, but Google just changed recently, a couple of months ago, the way they rank web pages. And now one of the piece of the ranking is actually mobile friendliness. So if your website is not mobile friendly it doesn't come up well for mobile and you cannot navigate it well on mobile, you actually lose on the ranking. So this kind of shows the direction of where people are heading. A lot of the searches are local searches, and most of them are done on mobile. So I wouldn't discard mobile for discoverability, but not for apps. Okay, apps is a completely different story. In apps, you need to go to the specific app store to look for the app, and there it's not Google search. As I said, the whole search algorithm works completely different, and it's very, very hard to find what you're looking for unless you know the exact name. So different kind of discoverability between apps and mobile, between apps and web. But I definitely think that web in general, on desktop, on tablet, and on mobile is key for discoverability, and mobile and desktop are probably higher than tablet in how much people are using search on them. Generally speaking, I think from the research I read about tablet recently, tablet is used mostly in front of the TV as a second screen. So you might use it some for search and some for kind of casual crawling the internet, right? Reading a few things, watching a few things, watching a slideshow, doing something kind of as you watch TV. But the two devices that you use the most as kind of a utility tool would be your mobile or your desktop.
Awesome, awesome. So that's all the questions we have at the moment. It's a final call for questions. If you have any more questions, definitely get them into us. theproductmentor.com/live. Back to you, Addi.
Okay, then. We're actually almost done here. So a few things to keep in mind. So what's important mostly is your user journey, right? So think about your user journey. Think about what are these touch points, where are they, and then figure out how do you build the best user experience for these specific touch points. And I think in a lot of cases you'll find that a hybrid can be your best solution. And in a hybrid, I mean you have a website and it might be responsive or adaptive to cover the gamut of devices, but you also have an app for specific interactions, specific experiences, to take advantage of these unique capabilities or a specific opportunity. You might have an app and a website, and you figure out there are things that you can actually bring into the app as a mobile web experience, as a responsive experience, into the app to allow, so for instance, the dispute I mentioned at the beginning is basically something we brought into the app as a responsive experience. So all you need is a call to action, and then you bring up basically a web view into your app. It looks just like the app, but it's an extension of it that goes into the web. And then you basically don't have to develop each and every feature on both app and mobile and the web for the different devices. So you kind of need to figure out what is it that really requires app experience and what apps are you building. What are these touch points within the user journey, and how do you combine the best user experience with the best method for what your needs are. And one last thing, from a time investment perspective, unique mobile apps are the hardest and the longest investment you'll make. A dedicated mobile site, an your website, is easier, and adaptive layouts are easier, even more than that, to basically build something that will cover the main screen sizes for your customers much quicker and easier for your customers to get it to market as soon as possible. So really think through these touch points and the user journey and the different devices, and look at your data and find these opportunities, find where and what you need to do to interact with your customers. I believe this is it.
So we have another question from Elizabeth. And Elizabeth was asking a question about why not download the app from the desktop and thus help the customer get used to going to the desktop product to get the app, as opposed to, I believe it's as opposed to going to the store or other places.
So that's a possibility, but if it's downloaded on desktop, you still need to move it to your phone somehow. So it's kind of a few-step process versus a much easier process when it's on your mobile device. And it's you don't necessarily, you might be able to identify that user using the user agent. So when a response, an HTML request is coming from the customer to your website, it identifies itself with a user agent, which basically tells you what is this device. And when you get this user agent information, you can react to it by sending the right kind of information back. So you might show a pop-up to download the app only when you identify the fact that it's a mobile phone versus desktop, and allow a better and more seamless user experience to download the app. But it's definitely an option to download to your desktop as well.
Got it. Got it. Did you have any other closing remarks, comments you want to make?
So one thing to think about is that things could go wrong. And it's important to do things well when you design and develop for mobile. You can burn yourself very, very quickly. I think the most important thing is testing. So especially if you develop responsive or adaptive, right, and you have different device sizes, you need to test on all of them and make sure it works exactly as you planned it works. It will work to make sure that your customers get the great user experience that you built for them. Don't cut corners. Don't check on one device and say, oh, it works, fine, because you might find yourself in a bit of a jam there. The other thing is performance. You really need to plan for the best performance for your website, and think about the different components and elements and the size of the imagery when you build for adaptive or responsive, just to make sure that it actually loads pretty well and doesn't interfere with the best user experience you can. And, think about mobile. I think that's the most important thing.
Great, great. So, Addi, thank you very much. This was a great talk. Addi Regev, Director of Product at Outbrain. And this was a great talk in web design in a multi-platform era, something that I know everyone is going to find very useful now and for a very long time. And also, as always, for those of you who ask me all the time, the presentation that what you just saw will be posted to our SlideShare channel, so you'll be able to get it there too. And also a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and everyone who joined us in the room and really from the rest of the internet, and the product mentor today. Also, don't forget, we've got session 4 of the Product Mentor is starting right away, and so if you are someone who would like to be a product mentor, very much like Addi that you see here today, definitely go and sign up at theproductmentor.com. Session 4 starts on November 1st, and please sign up. We can always use more mentors. We have hundreds of mentees, and as a mentor you can be anywhere in the world. We're a worldwide mentorship program, so don't worry what time zone or what country you're in. If you want to be a mentor, sign on up. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And with that said, I'll see you guys all next time. Thanks. Bye.